back to this week's episode of AMA Friday with Amy Miller, Recruiting in Yoga Pants. So this week we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm following up on our conversation last week about signing a right to represent. Is this a good idea? What do job seekers need to know before committing to something like that? This week, I'm going to cover somewhat quickly, somewhat high level, this whole concept around candidate ownership. And we're going to talk a little about how big companies, usually we see this in your larger companies, how they use things like PSLs, RPOs, and what's the other one? MSPs. That's it. Okay. So first of all, candidate ownership, horrible term, horrible. We should not use this terminology, but we do. Here we are. So what does it actually mean? Basically, the idea around it is, as I've said before, the ATS is a digital filing cabinet that holds all this information, right? So when you hit apply, there's a whole workflow that starts and buttons are pushed and data is entered and things are done that move you from one stage to the next. Your information lives in there forever. One of those things that happens is you, by applying to a role, can be assigned or tagged to a particular recruiter. So a lot of times a recruiter will actually go in, look at your application and say, ooh, that person looks great for this job. I'm going to attach myself to their record. So now your profile is owned by that recruiter. What this means is if you apply to a different role and another recruiter comes along and says, ooh, that person looks good for my role, if recruiter A is already in contact with you, there are likely some specific rules of engagement that recruiter B is going to have to follow, which includes calling up recruiter A and saying, yo, that person applied to my role too, let's share. In a perfect world, this is what happens. Everybody plays nicely in the sandbox. Everybody puts your interest at the very front of what they're doing and cares the most about your experience and where you want to go. In a perfect world. Just saying. So, but no, there are typically, particularly in those larger companies that have multiple recruiters, there are going to be some specific rules of engagement that we have to follow, okay? So ownership just simply means like I'm responsible for this person's profile. I'm the one that's taking the action to, reach out and collect data and push them to, hiring manager review or interviews or what have you. That ownership can change, right? Recruiter A might be like, you know what, not a fit, my hiring manager is no longer interested, or, we have another short list or whatever. Recruiter B gets to take full ownership. Wouldn't that be nice? Usually what happens is recruiter A is like, you better leave me on there because I saw him first. And then recruiter B gets partial credit or whatever. It's actually kind of silly. I've seen some really bad behavior over the years. Like for me, this is just me. I know other recruiters who believe this, not as many as I'd like, but a lot, thankfully. I'm so busy and I have so many candidates at any given time, I don't give a shit about ownership, okay? I'm filling my roles, I'm doing my thing, I'm hitting my goals and then some. Like, I don't care, right? It doesn't matter whose name is on it or who owns it or whatever. I'm just getting shit done and getting my roles filled. That's what I care about. Thankfully, a lot of recruiters do operate that way. We very easily meet or beat our goals, 2 hires a month, 5 hires a month, whatever. So it's not a big deal. But you will run into, unfortunately, some more transactional type recruiters who care a lot about that or maybe aren't that good at their job. And so they really have to grab onto every possible profile they can to try to hit their number. Glad it's not me. Glad it's not my team. Glad I don't have to work with any of those people right now. Just saying. All right, so that's kind of the ownership thing. Now let's dig in a bit to this big company, MSP, RPO kind of thing. So RPO is not exactly kind of adjacent sort of to this. So RPO is a recruitment process outsourcing. And so basically this is where a company may have a third party, like I don't know, pick a staffing agency, a Robert Half, an Aerotech, whatever, and they have recruiters who are specifically assigned to that client. So here's how that might work. Let's map this out here. So let's say Microsoft is the company that is doing the hiring. They want to bring in, this is almost always contract work, okay? I don't know that I've seen this outside of contracting. If you have, drop a comment. I would love to learn more. But let's say Microsoft is hiring and they need 100 customer service agents. I'm completely making this up, obviously. So Microsoft's hiring, they need 100 customer service agents, what we call vendor or V-dash is what we called them at Microsoft. Basically, that means they're contractors. They are employed by the RPO, the agency, whatever you want to call it. And that agency is going to get a job order for 100 CS agents. Guess who else gets the job order for 100 CS agents? This goes out to everybody, all the firms on the PSL. No, it's not a pumpkin spice latte. It is a preferred supplier list. That means a bunch of agencies are contracted with Microsoft on their PSL to submit candidates to those 100 customer service agent roles. Now, how do they do that? Well, they may ask you to sign a right to represent, like we talked about last week. So Microsoft is going to have a portal, and it is called a VMS, Vendor Management System. It's kind of the agency version of an ATS, if that makes sense. So this system may feed into the ATS a lot of times because of like co-employment rules, things like that, because you'll be an employee of the agency who's working with Microsoft or whatever company. So a lot of times this is actually a different kind of portal or data collection place, system, tool, where you get submitted. Okay, so you're submitted into this VMS. That's where that right to represent might come in, because they're time stamping like, oh no, I'm the agency that submitted this person. I have ownership of that candidate. But anyway, so all of these resumes get submitted into a VMS, and then a hiring manager is able to go into that portal and see all the people who have been presented to their opening, right? Or in the case of like, hey, we're hiring 100, maybe there's a centralized team that's going through all those applications, or maybe, you know, they're divvying them up, like, okay, these roles are for that manager, those roles are for that manager, things like that. So that can be done differently. It just depends on the contract, how the company wants to structure it, what makes sense, you know, from a just what's scalable, what we can actually, you know, easily review. And so once you as the job seeker have been submitted, you're now in this VMS, and you are hopefully going to get called for an interview. And so this is where, you know, really, so what are the questions you should ask? Okay, so now we're getting to the end of this. I want to wrap this up here. What are the things that you as a job seeker need to know? Very similar to the questions I told you to ask last week. You want to understand, like, what is the previous relationship, if any? Right? If you have you had a partnership with this company? Have you placed other people in these contract roles? I don't know that a recruiter will give you a direct answer to these things, but I'd want to know, like, how many of your submittals actually get called for an invite, an interview? Is it 50%? Is it 2%? Is it something different, right? Like, I'm going to put effort into the things that are going to give me a good return. This is why I don't like big national accounts. This is why I don't work with these low margin, big, ginormous organizations. Now, I say that today. I mean, if I get laid off tomorrow, I'm going to be singing a different tune, okay? I'll do what I got to do. But for the most part, these can be low reward, okay? They just are, because generally speaking, that PSL, that preferred supplier list, is multiple suppliers. It's multiple agencies. And each of those agencies probably has multiple recruiters. And they're all submitting candidates for the same jobs. Now, clearly this stuff works to some degree. We would not do it if we didn't actually end up hiring contractors, if we did not actually end up, making offers and building those contingent teams. So both things can be true. It can be true that this is perhaps an effective way to scale contract hiring. It can also be true that your odds as a job seeker of getting the call, getting the interview, and ultimately getting the job are maybe not super high. Doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. Doesn't mean you shouldn't take up the recruiter on their offer to, sign their RTR and be their candidate and have them submit you into their VMS. It's just not something I'm going to spend hours and hours preparing for or writing a resume for, unless I know for sure, like, my effort has to be matched by the return. Talk to your recruiters about this. Understand, realistically, what are the chances that I get a call? How many, people have you hired for this company? How many contractors do you have on staff currently? Like, what's the relationship you have with the Microsoft or whoever the company is? And you deserve to know those things, right? Because again, I want you to be taking the right actions and putting in the right amount of effort for the possibility of what you might get back. Okay? Contracting can be a phenomenal way to go. I left a full-time job to take a contract role at Microsoft 7 years ago, 8 years ago, long time ago. 11 years ago, 2013, y'all. Crazy. Left a full-time job in 2013, February of 2013, went to Microsoft, converted to a full-time employee at Microsoft in April. I was a contractor for literally 6 weeks. It was a 9-month contract. And I did that intentionally because I knew if I got in and proved myself, I had a good chance of converting. Somebody quit 2 weeks after I got there, and they're like, "Hey, Ames, we got an open role. Want to interview?" So I was definitely had the benefit of timing. It was not the norm. It's not because I was special. It's because the timing worked out. But, those are the potential, payoff. That's the potential ROI that you might see if you do want to explore contracting and working through one of these systems, okay? So be sure to ask your recruiter these hard questions, understand exactly what you're up against, what are the likelihood, what are the odds of me actually getting a call, those kinds of things. You deserve to know, my friends. All right. Not as quick as I thought it was going to be, but hopefully I gave you some good insight. What questions do you have about VMSs, PSLs, contract work, and candidate ownership? Ugh, we need a better word for that. All right, friends, stay safe out there. See you next week.